Good to see you, Luke.
Dude, good to see you, Phil. So, for those who don't know Phil, let me just say this. He is not only an amazing human, somebody I've been able to share meals with. Where was that place we went? Like that Roswell, not Roswell. What was that mill that we went to?
Oh, Marietta Market in
There you go.
Marietta, Georgia.
And
Cool,
but
cool spot.
he's an amazing guy, human first. We've had numerous great conversations about life and challenges and seasonal changes and stuff like that. But
No doubt.
you are also the author of a fantastic book, Rethink Communication. If I could have held it up, if I was sitting in my office, I would. But fantastic book. What came out last year, year and a half ago?
Beginning of last year. Yep.
And I think what's cool about it is that I've been able to hear from so many people, and you can see this just on the Amazon reviews alone, that it's just really resonated with people as it's kind of an opportunity for us to rethink, to use that word, but really shift our perception of communications in the church and the way that we're developing communication patterns. And what's funny is you wrote that before pandemics and, uh,
Yep.
stay in place and shelter in place, which, man, talk about a timely release. But you're also the creative arts pastor at Westridge Church, just north of Atlanta. So we have that in common, being Atlanta
Yeah.
hometown, ATL. What?
No doubt.
So anyway, and you were a speaker last year at SALT Conference, and we're excited to have you guys or have you back this year. And you
Yeah,
brought a
I can't
team
wait, man.
up, and so
Bringing them
Phil,
back too.
yeah,
Excited
well,
for it.
thank you for just honestly engaging in this. We were texting a couple weeks ago, and we started talking about like just what's happening in the world, what's happening in just with the church. And you and I both resonated on this topic that there's so much change happening in culture and in the church that creatives, communicators, those who are in the sort of creative arts, technical arts, sort of leadership seats are seeing massive shifts in sort of organizational power, organizational equity. And I started saying, well, man, that's interesting. Like, how do we help people start thinking about that shift and this sort of leading up? And then we started realizing, I mean, even you and I were talking about yesterday, just this idea that with what's happening in the world today, with some of the racial divide that's happening, that it's helping prove this point that you have made over and over, that leadership is not about power or position. It really is about relational equity. It's about being able to lead up well, whether you're in a seat of position or
Mhm.
power or not, right? And so, anyway, I think this is a timely conversation. So, thanks for joining in on this. I know, stay at place, shelter in home, not being able to gather is
Mhm.
a giant shift for the church. But how do you think this has really shifted the sort of role of that communications director, that creative arts pastor, the technical leader of the church? What do you see as someone who has
Yeah.
been sort of sensing this rethinking of communications change? What do you think this is doing to that seat, to that person?
Well, like you mentioned, a lot of what we talked about before, and what a lot of what I laid out in the book was helping communication be a ministry, not just a service department, and helping creative leaders and communication leaders have a seat at the table and be ready for that moment when they can step up and lead, not just manage a service department. And here we are, like you said, in the middle of where we're at with this pandemic, with so much divide and tension, and it really is an opportunity for the church and for church leaders to help shine a light, a bright light of hope instead of letting darkness be what everybody's seeing. So for us, we have a great opportunity as creative leaders. And I think I've talked to so many different creatives lately that are saying, okay, I didn't know what this pandemic was going to look like, but all of a sudden I have a seat at the table. Like all of a sudden they're asking me for the first time, like I've had a conversation with our pastor for the first time, or I've had a conversation with these ministry leaders, and they're looking to me to say, what now? Like, what do we do now?
Yeah,
And so I think for creatives, this is a moment, just like the whole theme of SALT last year, of like for such a time as this is a moment for creatives and artists to step up and lead. Like
yeah,
this is, and it doesn't mean by leading with positional authority, because positional authority isn't necessarily leadership. Positional authority may allow you to make a decision, but it doesn't mean
hmm,
you're actually leading. And so you can lead without positional authority, but just by leading up and by building relationships and doing some of the things we're going to talk about today, that's where real true leadership shines the brightest. on that. And it's like I said, for creatives right now, what an opportunity for us to actually innovate and create and make a bigger difference than ever before. So
You told
leaders
me
are
a
looking to us. Yeah, now's the time.
You told me a funny story when we were talking last week about the fact that you've been an author, you've been speaking at conferences about this. I mean, you have been not just out in sort of the world talking about the need for more content from the churches and more leadership sort of involvement in creative arts, communications, online platforms, stuff like this. But when this whole pandemic hit, you told me a funny story that your pastor kind of came to you. Tell that story a little bit.
Well, one, we serve with an incredible team, and I'm thankful that our pastor, who does have positional authority, leads incredibly well. I mean, I'm so there's a reason I've been at Westridge for 10 years. I'm thankful that I get to serve under healthy leadership. But when this pandemic started, the first week was all of us just trying to keep our head above water and figure out what we needed to do. Things were changing by the day, and it kind of felt like we went from like a 10-lane highway down to a 1-lane highway of what we could do and how we could pull this thing off. And we need to be able to meet. We can't meet in person. We can't do all this stuff that we used to be able to do a week ago. And my pastor just called me and said, "Hey, I'm seeing other churches step up and their other pastors step up and how they're using Facebook, how they're using social media." He's like, "I know you've talked to me about some of this stuff. I'm in. I'm here. You let me know. You tell me what we need to do. Build a plan, and just if I need to be on Facebook or do live streams once or twice or 3 times a week, whatever it takes, I'm in, because this is a moment for us as the church to lead and give hope." And I appreciated that so much. And what I was talking to you about before is, I don't think that moment would have just happened out of nowhere if it wasn't for trust being built over time, of opportunities multiple times where we're able to earn trust, where we're able to step up and add value to our leadership and to our pastor. Like, that moment didn't just happen. And it really took for not just me, but for our whole team to lead up in ways that my pastor could say, "Hey, I can lean into this because I know you've got my back, and I know our team has your back, and we're going to go into this and we're going to support each other and make a big difference with this opportunity." So it's just a cool moment of a lot of what we've been talking about, and that those kind of conversations are happening all across the country at so many different churches. And some churches are having conversations saying, "Hey, we don't have anybody to turn to because we haven't been investing in this area too," which is sad. But yeah, it's fun to see that and hear other stories that are very similar.
It's kind of this like epiphany moment where he was like, "Oh my gosh, Phil, you've been telling me about this forever. Now I need this more than ever." And I think there's an interesting principle in play there that um, even I guess I'd say it this way. As you were talking, I was thinking about this idea that leading up, you may actually be leading when you don't realize you're leading. You actually
Mhm.
may be gaining influence or have influence, but the time isn't right or the environment hasn't been prime.
Yep.
It's kind of like buying a fruit at the grocery store and it not being ripe yet, right? Like sometimes you have to buy the avocados before you can just turn it into guacamole. And you may be leading up in a realm in your church. And I think you would be a testament to that story that you were leading up and your pastor was listening. And so I think the first thing I just say to everyone listening is like, hey, sometimes you may not think that your leadership team is listening to you, but they are. And the more you can lead up in a healthy way, helps you not feel manipulative, but helps you add to this conversation of what is best for the community.
No
So
doubt.
let's kind of dive into these. What are some things that you can sort of give to our community as you think about, man, what would it look like for someone listening, someone part of the salt world, to start leading up today? I mean, maybe they've realized, oh wow, this is such time as this, and I haven't led up well. How do I lead up now, whether you're in charge or not?
Yeah, there's 4 things that I think. So I was thinking through this. That I would just, if I was sitting down with any of you watching, having coffee, here's what I'd say to you. The first one is to lead up by asking your boss or your senior leader, senior pastor, lead up by asking, "How can I have your back?" I've just found that that's a powerful phrase that I can share, but also that people can share to me. That means a ton. Because what I've learned, I mean, my dad's a senior pastor. He's retired now, but I got to watch the weight that was on his shoulders as a pastor, that I knew everybody in our church didn't necessarily understand. And so I know, sometimes for us as creatives, we can get so in our head around the things that we know and that we want to do and that we want to create, when sometimes we just have to step back and understand that there's a weight on that senior pastor that we may not understand or we won't understand. But we can say, hey, I can't understand what you have on your back, but I can tell you, how can I have your back? How can I step up? And is there something that I can take off your shoulders? Is there something that I can step up and lead with? Is there something that I can do to let you know I'm here for you and I've got your back? That I'll tell you from creatives and the senior pastors, that is typically the biggest tension of any relationship on a church staff. Often, between a senior pastor and a worship leader, or a creative arts pastor and a senior pastor, you guys share the same sandbox, and so typically a senior pastor, you can kind of end up feeling a little bit gun shy with that conversation with a creative team. And so when you can diffuse that and help them say, I've got your back, how can I support you?
Love that.
How can I serve you in that way? Because that just lets them know I'm behind you. I've got your vision. I've got your passion. I want to help serve you. That's just a powerful question you can have. But it's also, even as you lead down and lead out, if you can have that posture, that's where relational equity is built. That's where influence is built, because it's not about positional authority. Just because you're in charge doesn't mean you can't say, hey, how can I have your back? How can I support you? So just a
I think
super powerful question.
there's two things that I'd love to highlight in that. One, you're modeling for not only the teams that serve under you. What does it look like to lead up well by saying, "Hey, I'm in a place of serving, right? I'm in a place of
Mhm.
honor. I want to honor your position and your authority and the vision and mission that God has given you." And I think by modeling that up, you're going to have people who are underneath you who want to do that same thing to you. And there's something powerfully multiplying that can happen in
Yeah.
that effect. But I think the second thing that's really powerful about that is that you show the sort of empathy care side more than you care about yourself or your own ladder as you climb up, but that you are actually saying, no, I want to come under you and I want to serve your mission. I want to be on that same, I want to be in the same
Yeah.
sandbox as you said. I had a great friend who became a creative pastor of a church that was honestly a pretty traditional church. And they,
Mhm.
when he started, the pastor still was wearing a sport coat and a button up shirt. By the time he left the church, he was wearing jeans and oftentimes just a t-shirt when he spoke. But one of the stories he tells a lot is that to get influence with his pastor, he had to show his pastor that he cared about all the things that his pastor cared. So
Mhm.
he tells this story that this one Sunday morning, in the middle of his message, one of his camera operators, which is a volunteer, missed the key moment of capturing the visual when he was using some visual aids, and he just missed the camera shot.
Mhm.
And instead of just kind of playing it off of like, it's just a volunteer, my friend Jason said he went into the green room after the message and just was like, I can't believe it, we missed it, I'm so mad. And he goes, I was honestly over animated, but I wanted him to know that I cared just as much as he did that that visual aid happened. And he said that moment was a shift for them, that the pastor started realizing, oh wow, Jason cares about it more than I do. And then he said, I also finally had my pastor sort of going, oh, give them a break, it was just a volunteer. And he said, but that sort of changed because I think what you're saying of how can I have your back is saying, how can I care about the things you care about? Like, I'm
Mhm.
not just going to care that we're using 4K resolution or, DSLR technology versus with high depth of field and the sort of technical stuff that I think we can get caught up in sometimes. But I think what you're saying is, how can I care about the thing that God has placed on your shoulder and help you execute that mission? How can we partner together rather than grind a little bit?
No doubt.
That's
No
good
doubt.
stuff.
For
All right,
sure.
what else you got?
Second thing, after you lead up by asking how can I have your back, the second thing is, a lot of creative leaders don't realize that they can be a voice of clarity in the midst of chaos. And sometimes a senior leader, because they don't necessarily have a ton of time on their hands, or they wish they could have more time to help give more clarity and more direction for their team, sometimes they don't have that time. And so for us as creative leaders, one of the most powerful things we can do to lead up is to lead up with questions before answers.
Mm.
We can sometimes be in the solution business and we want to jump right into, hey, I saw this church do this, I saw this church do this, hey, we can do this, we buy these lights, or if we invest in this, or if we buy this or whatever, then we'll be set. When sometimes what we need to do is listen, and we just need to ask clarifying questions before we jump into giving them the solutions that may not even be the right solution for it. So there's three questions that I use all the time. I've shared this in the book. I've shared it, I think it's at SALT as well this last year. There's three clarifying questions that I'll use for a ministry or for our senior pastor to just to try to get a really clear target from them of what's on their heart, what they're trying to accomplish. And by doing that, we're able to build unity together to make sure that we're on the same page and that we can talk about it before it gets tense later on in the middle of a project or initiative or whatever it is. So there's three questions that you can ask. The first one is clarifying who is our target audience. So if you're talking about for your live stream, or if you're talking about your Sunday morning experience live or online, or you're talking about a new event or a set design or whatever it is that you're creating or that's on their heart that they're looking to you for, just make sure you know who is our target audience. Who are we trying to reach? Because you need to be able to put the hat on of that person as you create to make sure that you're reaching that person. You're going to create and do things differently for a parent of a high school student compared to communicating to a high school student. Whole different language that you're going to use. So if you don't know with crystal clarity who your audience is, you're not going to be able to lead up in an effective way to advocate for that person. Because as communication leaders, especially, our role is to advocate for our audience and not just think like a staff member. So we can get clarity around that. That's a huge thing that we need to be able to lead up and get clarity for. The second thing is, as we try to clarify that initiative or whatever it is, we say, what's the problem we're trying to solve? That is such a powerful question, especially for a senior leader, because sometimes when they're giving you a solution or they're giving you a directive, there's a burden on their heart, or there's something that is just keeping them up at night saying, like, if we could just solve this, if this is, I don't care about the solution, I care about solving this problem, you know? And so if we can use that as a way to make sure that we understand their heart and their burden and what they're dealing with, man, some powerful things happen
And we may
with that.
miss the problem, right? Because we may think, oh, the problem is that my pastor needs to have an audience, so let's go online. But what
Mhm.
he's really saying is, no, I actually want to make sure that they know we're still with them, we're still, doing ministry, we're still available, whatever. And so we
Mhm.
may even just the slightest little tweak of having,
Yeah,
miss clarity or a cloudy sort of vision, and that's huge. I love that.
for sure. For
All right, what's
sure.
your
And
third
then
one?
third one is, what's the win? Like, what's the objective for us, not only for us as a church, but also for the person we're trying to reach, for our target audience? Like, what are we trying to accomplish? But also, what's the person we're trying to reach? What are they trying to accomplish on this? To make sure that there's clarity around those things. Because if we create awesome creative solutions and we lead our teams well or lead ourselves well to come up with awesome art and creative work for the church, but it doesn't actually hit the target, it doesn't accomplish the win for the church or for the person we're trying to reach, then we missed our opportunity. Like that's not a win.
Yeah.
So what I've found more often than not is those things are not usually crystal clear at the first meeting that you talk about this stuff. So when you can have the posture to lead up to say, hey, I want to make sure that I'm owning this well and that our team has your back as we try to get better with our online stream or better with this initiative, whatever it is. Can I ask you a couple questions? Like, what's the target audience for this? Do you have somebody in mind, or do you have a a broad audience? What does that look like? And what's the problem you're trying to solve? And what's the win? Like, how will we know if we accomplished it? Some really robust, powerful conversation can happen.
You're almost asking creative teams and creative leaders inside the church to almost act like an internal agency. Like, hey, we're going to come alongside leadership and we're going to help them problem solve or strategize or figure out what is the best solution. And it sounds, and I think this is something I can speak to as one of the first phases of our team's company was we were a media company. We were working with the Lifeways and institutional organizations like Vanderbilt, Belmont University, and we sometimes learned that it was important to ask these questions, even if we knew the answers, simply so that they knew that we knew the answers, right? So that it wasn't us just trying to interpret. I mean, sometimes we would work, especially in the institutional side, they kind of needed us to ask these questions just so that they had that sort of reassurance. Oh, they are on our pay, on our same team,
Mhm.
rather than us going, got it, we're in, we're going to hit the ground running. Because efficiency isn't necessarily the game in that. It's more effectiveness, right? And so we
Mhm.
had this sort of principle internally that we would always put effectiveness over efficiency if we ever
Mhm.
had to compete the two against each other, because
Got it.
effectiveness meant that we were clarifying these three questions. We weren't just
Yeah.
running with this sort of unhealthy pace.
Well, from anything creative, it's really challenging to mobilize a team and mobilize others around you and delegate with with authority and giving them permission to create if they don't have clarity about what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And so the cool thing about those questions is it takes objectivity to the next level, and it means that the filter isn't, is my pastor going to like this? Especially for designers, I've talked to so many designers that are like, what's your filter for design? Well, if the pastor likes it or doesn't like it, like, well, that okay, that's a filter, but that's not the right filter because that may not accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to accomplish just making one person happy, great, but if you're trying to actually reach your target audience and accomplish the mission for that series or for that event or whatever it is, it's a whole different ballgame. So it does allow you to be objective around those questions to say, did we hit the target? Not did we make this one person happy?
Yeah, and when the feedback comes back after you've done a design or a project or a website, or you've laid out a plan for a live stream or a whole new online ministry plan, whatever, and the pastor doesn't like it, now you have these three clarifying questions
Yep.
to be able to go back to and say, okay, well, what of this doesn't it fit? Because there actually
Mhm.
may be a fourth factor there that we're not thinking about, and that is I also want
Exactly.
it to look modern or trendy, or
Yep.
I mean, and now you can bring that out to go, okay, well, we talked about this and it didn't come out.
Exactly.
All right, so you've
Exactly.
got
For
these
sure.
four things. You got how can I have your back? Lead with questions, not answers, because I think that's so quick, especially as our community is so analytical and we are problem solvers. I mean, I think the reason that most of us get to a seat at the table in any of our organizations is because we knew how to solve a problem well, or we
Mhm.
fixed or filled a hole or a need. Um, that's so good. Okay, so how can I have your back? Lead with questions. What else
Th-
can they do?
Third thing, and this is a stretch for some of our introverted, quiet leaders. Okay. But the third thing is to lead up by being ready to pitch your ideas. Because here's the lesson I've learned is that usually when you're sitting around the table and you're trying to solve a problem, what I found is the most established plan on the table usually wins. And there's a lot of power for us as creatives because we actually, our superpower as creatives is to solve problems. Like that's usually, it's not just to create cool stuff. Like we love solving problems. Apple solved a lot of problems with the first iPhone that previous phones couldn't solve, and that's what made it so compelling. Good products create solve a problem that people couldn't solve before. So that's our superpower. But guess what? The kryptonite for a lot of senior pastors and a lot of bosses that we're dealing with is time. Like they don't have the time to necessarily invest that you may have, or they don't have the expertise to invest in learning and reading the books that you read or all that stuff to know all the
So
things
good.
that you know. So, like what I found is if you can help think through, hey, what's the problem that we're going to be solving, and how can I create a good plan on paper if I can, or how can I show it and tell a solution here and hold it with a really open hand
I
because
love
you
the
don't want to come into it.
I
Go
love
ahead.
this idea of like it has to be ready to be pitched, because what I think sometimes we think, and I've been fallen prey to this, is like I just want to be invited to the meeting where we come up with ideas because maybe then I can help contribute. But what you're speaking into is this idea that you've got to have already done a little bit of that curation, sort of creative muscle work before you go into the
For
meeting,
sure.
because they don't have the time. Leadership doesn't want to just spend weeks on weeks. They don't love the
Yep.
process of solving problems as much as us and the creative and technical sort of communities do.
Yep.
Like I get up to solve problems. Like that's my first thought in the day is, okay, what's the problem that needs to get solved, right?
Mhm.
But there's a lot of senior leaderships in churches that they weren't called to ministry to solve problems as much as they were to be available for people and to help
Mhm.
serve the needs of the community. And so I love that you're saying like time is the kryptonite of leaders. We've got to come with at least a little bit of a fleshed out story. I mean, a little bit of a fleshed out sort of, plan here to say, hey, here's how we solve this. I mean, have you ever like experienced this firsthand in your world?
Many a times. I mean, so I mean, early on, I learned okay, if I'm going to scale and grow my team, like people knew that for communications early on. I started off as the communications director before I stepped up to creative arts pastor, and every step of the growth of our team took me going out and doing research, getting the job descriptions, customizing the job descriptions, creating a new flow chart to say, here's what this could look like. What do you think? How do we make this better? Here's providing, thinking through what are the barriers that I'm going to have to overcome or that we as a church are going to have to overcome and providing solutions and doing that with an open hand. Even a recent example, we've done a ton of things recently with our social media. Our team is killing it. Just it just innovating and doing a lot of new things, that has taken our pastor and other staff members to step up. So we were trying a lot of new things, and I knew I spend the first part of my Monday just trying to think big picture, look back of the season that we were just in, look down at where we're at this week, and look out for what's ahead. And as I was thinking through that, I realized, okay, we've been doing this social media rhythm for about 6 weeks. How are we doing? Because I feel like we're going to have a conversation with our senior leaders saying, hey, is what we're doing working? Are we seeing it go up? Are we seeing it decline? What lessons can we learn? So I jump on the phone with my assistant who's saying, I'm like, I need your help pulling these stats together. And I need your help building like some ways so that we can track and see where we're at. So we had the flow chart ready. And sure enough, the next day at our lead team, our pastor says, hey, how are we doing? What do you guys think? And so it was cool for us as a lead team to be able to talk through and just get the objective opinion for what we were feeling. But then I was able to say, hey, we actually have been pulling together some stats to be able to measure that same thing that you're talking about. And here's what we're learning. And I'll tell you, that became so clarifying for that conversation. And here's what the deal is: nobody asked me to do that. But I just knew if I'm going to be able to lead up with clarity and help us push into this area and improve, I'm going to have to do the hard work. I'm going to have to mobilize our team to help do that. And so every step of the way, I think if you can create, like I was, I don't know if she's watching live today, but was coaching an awesome creative leader, and she had the opportunity to sit in front of her team and the staff to be able to say, hey, here's what's on my plate, and here's why we might need to grow our ministry and grow our staff. And I just walked her through how to create the areas of ownership that she owns for communications at her church. And it was a mind map. I use a tool called Mind Node that just allows you to quickly visualize a idea or whatever. Free app, great idea to check out. So she created this chart and printed it out, and her team was like, "Oh my goodness, we have a problem." And they may have thought that they may have, been able to hear her explain, like, hey, here's all this on my plate, here's what's going on. But it's different when you can show a picture. It's different
Yeah.
when you can pitch an idea to say, here's the problem, here's a solution, like, here's some ways that we could do this, but what do you think? How do I hold this with an open hand instead of closed fist, and invite other people into that and make it better on that? So just can't emphasize that enough. The most established plan on the table usually wins. And so you
I,
as creative has an opportunity.
I love that. And I want to pull out another principle that I'm hearing you speak into, and that is this idea that leaders who lead with influence figure out how to get their organizations to be proactive decision makers rather than reactive decision makers.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm fighting this all the time in my organization with our team of just saying, hey, I want us to constantly be in a season where we have the freedom and the ability to be proactive rather than reactive. Now, pandemics and, you know, church closings and sort of national news sometimes cause us to have to go back into a reactive state. But what you're saying here is be ready to come to the table with an idea. Curate enough, have enough creativity in your sort of wheelhouse, whether it's Evernotes or MindNote documents or Google Docs or whatever it is that you use to sort of curate these ideas. Have them fleshed out so that you become the proactive person in the room, not just constantly waiting for someone to give you the, okay, hey, here's the project, go run with it.
Yeah. Like,
Because
well,
one of the things I've said along the way to our team is like, when you own something well, you don't have the ability to say that's not my job, because whoever owns whatever it is, whether it's a company or a job or a project or a task, they can't say, oh, that's not my job, because the owner has to be responsible for all jobs. And so to be proactive means to think, okay, where's this maybe going to fall through the cracks, or where are the holes, so that I can be ready. And honestly, I'll just say this: you're going to appear a whole lot smarter too when you come to the table and you're like, hey, I already got a plan. Whether it's good or not, you at least appear like, hey, I didn't just bring this to you for you to solve. I brought this to say, hey,
yeah,
here's maybe something. And it goes back to, you can lead with the question, but maybe you're leading with a question so that you're ready with an answer on the back end.
for sure. There's a brilliant book called Accidental Creative by Todd Henry,
Hmm.
and he just talks about this principle. Like, it's hard to be brilliant at a moment's notice, and you don't necessarily know when your pastor is going to knock on your door or call you, or your boss is going to say, hey, what do you think about this? And so you have to be ready. You have to have your as creatives, we have to create our own rhythm for us of how we work and how we lead ourselves. And I know for me, like, I've always got screenshots going. I'm always collecting because I never know I'm going to encounter a problem 2 months from now or 2 years from now that I just screenshotted. That I'm going to say, hey, here's an idea. Here's what I can show you. Here's how we could do this. And so one practical tool for a lot of creative teams, or even for you individually, is to do show and tell. Like actually invite your team to just go out for 2 hours on YouTube, on Pinterest, or wherever you need to go, collect ideas that you think you might one day be able to use because they solved a compelling problem, and collect those and get in a rhythm of that. And I promise you, the next meeting when somebody says, hey, we need an idea for a set design that's simple, that's low budget, but that can do this. This is the problem we're trying to solve. You're like, hey, can I show you something? Our team was just talking about this very idea, and here's maybe something that we could apply to this and customize. So it does position you as a person that is leading with influence, just by how you're leading yourself and your team well.
I
So
love
super
that.
powerful principle.
I love that. Okay, fourth one. What do you got?
All right, fourth one, and there probably could be a lot more, but we'll keep it simple today. Of this one, this this probably should be first, but I'll lead it last, and that's to lead up by being a great follower. Uh, Easy to say, really, really hard to do. Let's be honest. I mean, we typically as creatives we think down, not up. We think about who's looking to us for answers, or how we're, the volunteers that are looking to us, and how do we set them up for success. We don't always think about how we're leading up and having their back. And that starts with the first question, but it means so much more. Of one thing that I think I've tried to learn the value of, and I want to get better at this every day, every year, is, I want to know the heart of our pastor, of my boss. Like I want to know, like I want to learn what breaks their heart. Like I want to learn what they value. That was one of the most important things for me as a communications director getting started, is I wanted to learn the values behind how our pastor was making decisions. Because if our communication was going to have his voice, whether he was writing it or not, I needed to make sure that it reflected his values. So if authenticity is a huge value for him, it's a huge value for our whole church. And everything we do, everything we create needs to reflect that. But if I wasn't looking for his values and just looking for his directives, I don't think I would have taken that away. So that's huge, because that needs to be a filter for you based off of what they value. And then this is huge too, is everybody learns differently. Everybody receives new ideas differently. There's going to be some people that are very reflective, that need to hear your idea and take a week and reflect on it. There's other people that are optimistic and just believe that you're going to jump right in and know, hey, yeah, you can take it and own it. And they're going to want you to hit the go button right after that meeting. There's going to be some that are more that are visual learners. There's some that are auditory. There's some that are written. And so if you don't know kind of the love language, if you will, for the person that you're speaking to, or that you're sitting across from, or let's be honest, if you're on a Zoom meeting with this person, for a lot of us, like we're dealing with right now, if we don't understand how they learn, we're going to miss opportunities, because we may be saying something that is important, that can solve a problem, but they may not be able to hear it in the way that you're presenting it. So
Totally
for
true.
us as leaders, we've got to reflect how that person is going to best receive that, because they are our target audience. And there's something super powerful if your boss knows that you've got their back, and that you're trying to grow as a follower, and being a good leader by being led. I mean, we see this in scripture. These aren't new ideas. These are God ideas. These are things that we know as we follow closer to Jesus. So many other things fall in line. It simplifies everything. So we can see a lot of that modeled in how we can try to model for ourselves as creatives and as staff members and as church leaders. If we can just embrace the idea of how can I become a better follower today, that's not diminishing your leadership. It's enhancing it. It's growing it.
100%. And our good friend Gary Molander has said numerous times, be wary of following a leader who has never followed.
Mm,
And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And obviously, you're speaking into this as well, this idea that we've got to lead up well by following up well. And I think really you model that, and you help, your organization and the people underneath you and your teams, whether it's volunteers. I mean, because the truth of the matter is everybody leads somewhere. So
mm,
even if you're the volunteer in an organization, or you're kind of feel like you're low man on the totem pole, you're still leading in some way. And I think what you're saying is the better follower you are, or the better you are able to sort of honor those above you, the more you're going to model and exemplify the sort of servant leadership that we all want to be under. I mean, we don't want to be following a dictator, or as we kind of started out, this idea of We don't want to just follow someone because of power or because of a title. We want to follow somebody who we feel like has our best interest at heart. And that the more you follow someone else, the more that you're going to be able to lead beneath you. And I think your leaders will see that too, and they always respect the person who has their best interest at heart.
Yeah, one thing I'd say too is a lot of people watching now may be saying, "Hey, that's great, but my leader isn't great. My leader doesn't have my back. My leader isn't thinking about me or trying to ask these kind of questions, or they're not. I can barely sit down and talk with them." And I would say God's going to teach you some of those moments and teach you through that valley, and teach you through these moments that you're dealing with, and it's going to help you become a better leader for next time. Because sometimes those are things that you're going to realize like, wow, I don't want to become that kind of a leader. So how can I make sure I'm not doing that to other people unintentionally? But God's going to use those moments if you're faithful to what God's given you in the moment and the time, the talents that God's given you. That's the most important thing. But it also is the best opportunity for you to create change too, because it's easy for excuses to be made. If you're not being a good follower, it's hard for them to be a good leader
Yeah,
of you too. So it just helps everything if you can lean into that. And I've just found time and time again, God honors faithful leadership, and he honors faithful following. And so He's going to take care of the rest. And I think too, even for you, if you can't get behind your leader, you can get behind your why. You can get behind your mission. And as I talked about on the stage at Salt, our mission isn't to create cool stuff. It's not even to get our own ideas on the table. It's not about getting our way. Our why behind everything we do is just to put Jesus in the spotlight.
mm,
So if we can't get behind our boss, we can get behind that, and we can be faithful behind that mission. So it's just so important that we stay focused on that, and continue to try to grow in that, because you got to fight for it. It doesn't just happen. You've got to fight for it day in, day out.
I love it. I love it. All right, so I have to just ask this question because I'm sitting here thinking about the people watching this. There's probably someone who is sitting here listening to this conversation, going, "Phil, I've been at my church for 10 plus years in my role, and I feel like I've done everything that you've just outlined, and my pastor still won't take a meeting with me, or still won't understand why I feel like we need to make this seismic shift from an organizational standpoint." What do you say to that person who feels like they've done everything, they've earned their influence, and they still just are getting overlooked, or they're still just kind of getting passed up in the organizational culture, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally? They still perceive that. That's still a real feeling. What do you say to that person?
Uh, First thing I'd say is try to find an outlet. Like, try to find an area where you've got a long runway to run and lead and build something. Um, I think for a lot of people, a lot of senior pastors, they didn't learn Facebook and YouTube in seminary. So their eyes aren't even set on it. They should be more now than they were. But there may be a long runway for you to lead where you may not have much ownership or anything from your senior leader, but you may have opportunity to lead and build something that is going to create a way for you guys to connect later on. I know for us, like, Facebook wasn't on really as a church. It wasn't much on our radar 10 years ago when I got my start. I mean, it was more, hey, just help lead our print stuff. And I had a long runway to help build some influence by faithfully trying to do a good job with social media the way that we could. And it created trust later on, for us to be able to build together some more things. So that might be your starting point for you. That might be your opportunity to just find that area, that outlet for you where you can build and share stats, share stories, share opportunities of things that God's doing through what you're building there, and you might see some of that influence and relationship grow. The other hard reality is, I would say, if you can't get behind your senior pastor's vision or get behind their heart of where they're leading the church, I, I think don't diminish what God's doing through them, but you may need to get out of the way. You may need to find a place where you can get behind that, because churches have enough disunity as it is. It, don't be a source of it. Don't be a source of frustration all the time if you just can't get behind that vision. And that might be an opportunity for you to say, okay, God, are you leading me somewhere else? Hold that open handed with God to say, hey, I have this burden on my heart. I have these desires on my heart, and I'm not able to do that here. God, if you want to open a door, I'm listening. But until then, until you open that door, I'm going to be faithful with everything that you've given me. That's all we can do. And if we believe what we say we believe, we can trust God with that. We can trust God with giving our best in those moments and know that God's going to do something through it.
So good. Phil, thank you, man. I appreciate this.
Thanks, Luke. Appreciate it, man.
So, for those who want to connect with you, what is the best way they can get in touch?
And you take your pick. So you can email me, phil@philbowdle.com. So BOWDLE.com. I'm on Facebook, Twitter. You can text me. I leave my number in the back of the book, so I might as well leave it here. So you can text me 678-653-2047. Love to reach out to you, help you if I can help with anything to have your back. That's what I'm here for. And then if you want to check out the book, Rethink Communication, it's on Amazon, or if you just go to rethinkcommunicationbook.com, you can find links for all the places to grab that for you or for your team or your staff.
I love that. Yeah, the book is phenomenal. I can't speak highly enough about it. And you also did 2 sessions at SALT last year that I think in many ways are beautiful compliments, as long as this discussion, but they're beautiful compliments to that book. And if that's something that you've read the book and you're like, gosh, I just want to go a little bit deeper, I want to sort of
Mhm.
recap on certain things, both of those classes are on SALT University. I'd encourage you and your teams to take a look at that. It was the communications playbook, and I think the social media playbook. Is that right?
Yep, correct.
And
Yep.
I don't know if you want to, but do you want to give a slight tease at all to anything that you may be preparing for SALT 2020? I haven't prepped you on this, but this is your chance to
Do I?
maybe tip the the toe into the water a little bit.
Yeah. So a lot of stuff developing around this and hopefully some news to share before long. But I think, in a lot of ways, Rethink Communication was the book that I just had to get out. There was a lot of things out there that I'd learned that I think would help be really practical, a good playbook for church communication. I'll just tell you what's keeping me up at night these days is and it's never been more relevant than now because this book title and this idea had been in me before this even started before this whole pandemic happened. And I think for us as church leaders, um, we got to get behind the Great Commission. That's what God called every one of us to do. He said, "Go and make disciples." And I think the church is at a problem to solve right now, where we go and how we make disciples looks different now than it did 30 years ago. And so where we go and how we make disciples needs to change, and we need a new playbook. And so I think for us as church leaders and especially as creative leaders, we got to be at the front lines of that. And we are more equipped than ever before to be at the front lines because where we're going to go and how we're going to make them is going to be digitally. And there's a lot of things there that we have the greatest opportunities we've ever had to communicate the gospel and to go and make disciples. So I'm just going to hopefully be able to unpack that of practically what does that look like? How do we do it? Where do we go? How do we make? What are we learning about this kind of stuff? So really pumped for sharing about that. Pumped about SALT and bringing our team there
The
and
digital
all
Great
that stuff.
Commission. I love that.
Gonna be fun.
Well, Phil, thank you for just taking time today to hang with us, and I hope you guys do check out the
Pleasure.
book. And yeah, we'll stay in touch.
Absolutely. Appreciate you, my
See
friend.
you, brother.